Welcome to How Does Your Garden Grow? I hope you enjoy this informative gardening program. Welcome to How Does Your Garden Grow? We're at Weston Nurseries for their spring pruning seminar. We are going to find out a little bit about how to trim your beautiful trees and shrubs with Henry Patt from Holliston. He's going to show us what to prune, when to prune, and what tools and techniques work best, and what safety features we have to look out for so we stay safe while doing it. So let's get started.
No, I'm retired, even though I did work 21 years here. I've been retired 3-4 years. I enjoy the agriculture and the horticulture. My wife and I, we have a blueberry farm over in Holliston, and if you raise any fruits, you know you have to prune them each year, otherwise your production drops off and you get a lot of leaf growth the following year, so it's important that you prune your plants. I did bring in, if you're interested in them, in the back table, there's a handout on recipes for blueberries. We have a U-pick blueberry farm in Holliston. If you're interested in picking fresh blueberries off the bush, they're the best. It's July, it's usually the Thursday after July till the middle of August is the picking time frame. And it's usually Thursday through Saturday. And I'm in the midst of pruning myself. There's about 3,000 blueberry bushes on 4 acres. So I have to prune each bush each year. If I don't, the production drops off. Same thing if you have dogwoods or crabapple trees or apple trees or peach trees. If you don't prune these plants over the years, you could have problems with them. There are many issues. What I like to do is kind of discuss the tools that I use, care of them. The handout that's been given to you, I'm not going to spend much time on that, but I will go a little bit on that. I brought in some samples of plant material, how I take care of them and prune them, and that will be kind of the end of it. Why we prune to invigorate the plant, also to open the plant up to get air drainage. If you don't have good air drainage, your plant is a good place as the spring develops, is a good place for bugs and diseases to start in. So by pruning, you're going to cut down the amount of area that the bugs and diseases can start in and cause problems on your plants. Another reason is you'll have issues. This here, if you look closely, this is called black knot. It's a disease. It doesn't kill the plant. However, being here, it slows down the amount of sap going up into your branches. So if you have a plant with this black knot on it, you want to come down maybe a couple inches and cut it off and get rid of it. This disease is more prone to plums and cherries. It's, sometimes you'll have on flowering cherry trees, you might see bumps like this on some of the branches. I would just cut it out. Disease-wise, if you have a very wet year, I notice this disease spreads more in the plant. So this is one of the reasons you'd want to prune. You want to get rid of diseased branches. Another problem you can have is this here is a branch from a blueberry plant. As the blueberry plant was growing, I've noticed that the branch wasn't producing any leaves and not doing good. And in checking it out, there's like a black hole at the base. And what this tells me is this hole started at the top. This is a moth. A moth laid an egg on the young tender bark in the springtime. And that egg hatched into a worm or a borer, and it went down the whole stem and down into the bottom portions of the branch. At that point, it emerged, and this was later in the season. So if you have branches that have weeping leaves on it and the other branches are nice and healthy, you probably have a borer in that, and you would be best just cutting it off. You could check and see if there's a hole. You might see a borer coming out if you catch it in there. But that's another item that I look for when I'm out pruning. On the tools, this is the basic tool that I love and use. It's called a hand pruner. And hand pruners generally are what we call bypass. This cutting blade bypasses this holding blade, so it's a bypass pruner. Most pruners out there are bypass. The reason there's more of these than the other types is that when you close it together, it's very narrow. So if you have a very bushy plant, you can get in and prune very good. The other type of pruners are what we call anvil. And this here is called an anvil type pruner. And what it is, it's a flat surface with the sharp edge on both sides. Comes down and you get your cutting material in between and you cut. And if you notice on the end, instead of a point, it's rather blunt. And the reason for that is you need a lot of support on the end of the cutting edge. So there are two types of pruners. Anvil is cutting down on a flat surface with your cutting material in between, and the other one is your bypass. And the reason you see more of these is because these are a little bit easier in getting in plants that have a lot of branches and you have to go in. On these, there are many makes of these out there. Pruning most of my lifetime, I've come to love the Falco Pruners. Falcos were developed in, I believe, Switzerland. Good heavy steel, good metal. Interchangeable parts. If the blade gets damaged or broken, you can usually replace the blade. If your bolt gets worn and it's kind of flexible over the years, you might have to put a new bolt in. They're not easy to find because it's not a part you generally would be exchanging. They're so well made. I enjoy these very much. In sharpening these, you'll find that it's flat on one side, and that other side it has like a little bit of a slope or a hill to it. That's the side that you're going to sharpen on. Whether you have a whetstone or, I like these, I came across these working here. These are tiny chips of diamonds embedded. And what happens is the diamonds are very good for sharpening and putting on a fine edge. I love this here because I can fold it up, put it in my pocket. If I have to touch up after pruning 100 plants, then I take it out. I can touch up my pruners. So you got to remember, though, that on a bypass pruner, you never sharpen on the flat side. If you do, you're going to destroy your blade's cutting ability. You're going to take your pruner, open it up, and where you see that it's kind of a little bit of a hill, that's going down to the edge. And this is where you would take your sharpener and kind of push down on that edge and push out towards the front. By doing that, you're sharpening your blade. And if you want to have a good sharp blade on all your pruning tools, the reason being is you want nice, clean, sharp cuts. If you have ragged cuts, that's more area the plant has to heal. And the more area it has to heal, you're taking away from the sap system that should be rejuvenating and producing new leaves and flowers. So in pruning, always keep your tools sharp. And again, on bypass, find the side that's got the hill, and you're going to go on top of the hill and sharpen in a down position going out. This sharpener will probably last my lifetime and somebody else's. It's like a diamond, diamond in the rough. But I love it. It does a nice job. To test it, you can use your finger if you don't have a piece of paper around. Just be careful with your finger how you test it. Generally, I would come across to test it. If it kind of drags a little bit, that means it's pretty sharp. If you have a piece of paper, you can take your paper and fold it in half and kind of take the fold and run it across here. And if it cuts easy, you know you did a good job. The other thing is, if you hold the handle that's attached to this blade, you can actually take it and like, you know, if you have a piece of dead wood or a little branch, you can scrape it and see if it cuts in pretty good. But once you do that, you know you got a good blade. The holding blade here, well, most people don't pay attention to it. You really should, because what happens when you prune in the spring, as the sap is coming up from the root system, it's now going into your branches, you're going to be cutting live tissue. When I say live, you're going to see sap oozing out during the cut or after the cut. This sap can be a problem. Usually on pruners, I would, after sharpening it, getting it ready for the spring, I would then get out my 3-in-1 oil, or if you got sewing machine oil, or even cooking oil, you know, a drop or two. And what you do is you go into the top here, a couple of drops, move this back and forth to get the oil lubricated in there. You generally should be lubricating your pruners at least once a year if you don't do a lot of pruning. If you do a lot of pruning and you feel it's starting to stick on you, and maybe, you know, needs a couple more drops. The other thing that happens that a lot of people don't realize is that as that sap is oozing out of the plant and you're pruning active material, that sap will collect on the cutting blade and this holding blade. And that sap, as it dries, it becomes a resin, it becomes sticky. So that if you've did a couple of drops of oil and your pruner still stick or your lopper still stick, check and see if you have resin on the back of your cutting blade. If you do, then you want to take a pocket knife or a coin or something to scrape. And what you're doing is you're going to scrape off this resin, and by doing that, the blade should pass by the holding blade without sticking. And a lot of people don't realize this, and they end up taking their pruners and putting it away, going out and buy a new one. And a lot of times it's just the resin that's built up from pruning. The holding side, that's where the side that holds your limb or your branch, that should also be pruned. And even doing this one here, I've noticed I've got a little bit of dirt here on my blade, so I do have some resin on this pair of Falco Pruners. As far as the type of Falco, this is a Falco number 2. This is the one that they originally came out with. The Falco number 2 has been around, God, at least 50 years now. Well made. Generally, you'd use this most of the time. If you do a lot of pruning, I've learned over the years that when I prune, I like to be able to prune for a long time. And when you prune or type, you're moving your tendons in your arm. And Falco has come out with this here. If you notice, this handle turns. And what this does is, if I'm holding this, I'm left-handed. There are 2 types. There are left-handed and right-handers. I'm not going to get into the debate either one, but they both work. And what happens is you close this, this swivels, so it takes off some of the tendon wearness, and it makes it a little bit easier on the hand. But generally, most people wouldn't need to buy this. I do because of the amount of pruning I have to do, and I love it. This has an additional spot. Sometimes you have to put a drop or 2 of oil down here on the handle that swivels. and that keeps it going. If this actually dries and doesn't turn very good, you can physically pull it off, clean up your shaft, put it back together again, and you're off and running. So, but I'll tell you, having used this one most of my lifetime, and then finding this later on, it took me a little while getting used to, because now you got something that moves here instead of on the end. And some people, I know some people said, no, I don't like them, I don't want them. They'll go back to this. They're not thinking long term on the tendons. But basically, all you have to do is, keep your hand pruner sharp, lopper sharp, whatever. Always on your bypass, sharpen on the hillside. And a couple of drops of oil. Clean the resin on if you have some. And other than that, you should have a good pair of pruners to do your pruning. And again, if you're interested in the variety, this is a Falco number 2. Left-handers are a Falco number 10. Right-handers are a Falco number 7. So be careful in buying this one that has a rotating handle. Any questions on this? Okay. Same thing on the loppers. This is old, goes back to the 1960s. Wooden handle, the old-fashioned type, does a nice job. It's bypass. Again, you want to keep your back side of your blade clear of resin, also the holding. You want to put a couple of drops of oil in when you go to use them. They're really wonderful until you start getting above age 50. I've noticed that I enjoy the newer version, which I have here. But a pair of loppers is good if you have forsythia, got blueberry bushes, you got winterberry, smaller size shrubs. If you have ornamental trees that aren't too high up, you can go in and cut out your branches. People say, well, how many branches, how many inches, how far back do I cut? The simplest way I can tell you to prune is when you stand back and look at your tree, we're looking at a tree now, the best time of year to prune is in the winter months. The leaves are off, you can see the canopy, you can see the branches. When you prune in the winter, once the sap starts coming up in the spring, the cuts will start healing. No bugs, no diseases in the early part of the spring. So wintertime is actually one of the best times to prune plants that lose their leaves. Also, you can do evergreens too, to protect them from spreading open with an ice storm. You might want to touch them up end of fall before you get into winter. But again, now, same thing on cleaning and pruning and sharpening. On these here, you have a bolt and you have a holding nut. If you find it's kind of loose and wiggly, you're going to need 2 wrenches, one on the head of the nut side and one on the actual nut, the holding nut. And you can either loosen or tighten it, but you have to loosen up the holding nut. Once this is loosened, you can take and tighten or loosen the holding bolt. Yeah, once you get it to where you say, oh, it's pretty tight, then you tighten up the holding nut. And by doing that, you can control now how tight you want to have your loppers. But this is a nice pair of loppers. I've had them for a long time. I've lost the original holding screws. I've used shingle nails. Work just as good. So it's a good pair of loppers. On this one here, this is a newer version. These probably came about in the last 15, 20 years. These are what we call a compound lopper. They're compound because they have this extra shaft of metal. And what this does, it gives you more strength. And because of that, this is 2 times stronger than the old-fashioned one. So I find using these, I don't have to exert as much energy in using these. On pruning, I have several apple trees and fruit trees. I find that this is very good when you start getting up about like a 1/2 inch or 3/4 of an inch. This is marvelous. And this is a little bit different on sharpening. It has a straight edge. So it's like a kitchen knife. If you use a kitchen knife for peeling an apple or an orange, that's the knife you'd be looking at here. You're going to sharpen this. You can sharpen it from both sides. So you can sharpen it from this side here. You can sharpen it from this side also. And you got to remember, it goes down on a flat surface, so you kind of want to sharpen this equal all the way down on both sides. But I love this for doing the blueberries because I have to take out a lot of the older canes, and also in the apple trees. And again, if you have a bird and you're standing back and looking at your tree, you want to have the tree so a small bird can fly through the branching. If a small bird can fly through the branching because you've pruned out dense areas of growth, you're going to have good air drainage. And with good air drainage, you're going to have less disease coming in. In the springtime, when the weather gets warm and hot and humid, diseases proliferate by the millions. You get a million of spores floating around in the air. And if you have a congested, wet spot on your tree, the disease can start in on that leaf area. You can get brown rot, you can get black rot. Black rot is usually the leaves on your apple trees. Brown rot is more on your peach trees. So you want to kind of look back on your trees that lose their leaves. When you prune, if you can visually say, oh, I got to get rid of that one because the bird can't fly through that area or the other area. That's the best and easiest way to remember on pruning your trees. You want to prune it so a small bird can fly through the branching, and you'll have good air drainage. You'll have spots where you won't have bugs, making a home out of it, and you'll have, next thing you know, a yellow jacket nest in a plant that you walk nearby during the summer quite a bit. So you want to be careful on your pruning. Another thing I like about this is they have these arms which can extend. So you can make this long so you can get down at the base of, say, a forsythia bush, a hydrangea bush, or if you're doing an apple tree, you can get up higher, not use a step ladder if your apple tree or crab apple isn't too tall. Again, these go up and down. So you can make these small. If you're doing a forsythia bush, you don't need it out, because the further out you go, this end gets heavier. So by making the arms a little bit shorter, these are a little bit easier to work with. So this is very nice for what I have to use them for, and I like them very much. This is, sometimes you need to use a handsaw on your trees. You might have a big branch that has been damaged. I like these saws to a certain extent. They're called a bow saw. This is a small one. This you can easily use to cut off bigger branches in a dogwood tree or a crabapple tree or a peach or a pear tree or a plum tree. The spacing of the teeth are very tight. There's not much air space in between. And the other thing is, when they make these, they don't separate them. Usually they'll take half of them and have them bent to this side, then they'll take the other half and bend them to that side. And this is called a kerf. When you saw, this is the spacing that you have. I've noticed on these, though, that if you have very thick pieces of wood and you get further down in, these start to bind up. And that's because these teeth aren't quite wide enough. If you use them a lot, you know, they can get dull. To me, it's a chore to try to sharpen them. Money-wise, they're not too expensive. I would rather go out, if I have trouble with the blade, just buy what I need for a new blade at the hardware store. Come home and take out the old one and put a new one in. You want to be careful when you change the blade. You want the blade facing away from you. So I usually put the end on the ground, put it between my knees or almost my knees, and this hand is going to hold the back of it. You're going to lift up this arm here, and that has some tension on it, so you got to hold it all the way. Now you can see it's loose. So you can unhitch it here, and the little pin here on the end, push that pin out, put a new one in, put your pin back in, line these two back up again, put it back down on the ground, and then you would tighten it up and have it facing away from you in case, it springs on you. But this is my treatment of the bow saw. Use them on smaller branches. If you have trouble with the blade and you know the teeth need to be sharpened, you're not into sharpening, it's cheaper just to go out and get a new one. The other one I love is the pocket handsaw. These probably came out about 20 years ago, a pocket version. It locks in place. Again, I like Falco, so this happens to be a Falco. There are other makes out there, but I happen to like the Falco line. If you look closely at the blade itself, the teeth pointing down, they're angled a whisker towards the handle. And this tells you that in using this, you want to put your strength into your pull stroke and not into the push stroke. So you push gently, you pull back hard, and you'll have your cuts going a lot quicker and easier. This here is another one. It's so unique the way the teeth are. I would never attempt to sharpen this. I would just go out and get another blade if it got to the point where it's really dull. The one thing you want to watch with these, if you're down at the base of a plant like a forsythia, and you got a lot of branches coming out, you want to be careful of the end. Sometimes you can get stuck, and then you twist it or bend a little bit. You can break off the tip a little bit. That's the only thing I would caution on using this at the base of plants, taking out bigger plants. I like it again because I can put it in my pocket if I have my pruners and I'm busy going along. All of a sudden, that branch is too big. I can pull this out and take it down. So I like this because I can keep it on me. But that's pretty much the tools that I would get involved with. I didn't bring it in. I have a long pole pruner. It's on a long pole. It has a hook on the end with a rope, and some have a rope mechanism on the top. Some have a chain. The chain mechanism, long as it's like a chain on a bicycle, you're fine. But sometimes if you're up in the midst of a tree, the chain can get twisted a little bit, and you don't know what's going on. You want to pull it out and look up where the chain goes over a little pulley, and then straighten it out. The rope one usually doesn't get stuck. But if you got tall trees and they're too high to work with a step ladder, you'd want to use your pole pruner. Step ladders I like if the trees aren't more than 12 feet up, but be careful with them because you can tip on a step ladder. They're kind of dangerous. That brings me to my safety issue. What we have is we have 10 fingers. We want to keep them. And by wearing gloves, you're going to be all right. I found over the years that in pruning, 3,000 blueberry plants. I don't know if you know, but in pruning blueberries, there's a lot of branches you have to take off. They send up a lot of nice new shoots each year if you prune them. So I generally wear a pair of gloves. And what I'm doing when I prune, I'll end up, because I don't like moving branches 2 or 3 times, I'll take the branches I'm cutting off and I'll keep them in my hand. And then I'll go to my next branch and I'll cut here. So I keep accumulating the branches in one hand. But in the meantime, I'm pruning, then I go over here and prune this one here. So, and then I'll go back to where I throw my trimmings, usually I have a garden way cart or a wheelbarrow, or a top on the ground, I'll throw my branches there. Usually when I'm done pruning the field, I'll kind of look at my glove, this one here. A lot of times I have 2 or 3 cuts on this finger here. Yeah, I'm not talking on a cell phone out in the field. I'm not listening to music. I'm listening maybe to birds or a dog barking way off in the distance. But it's important that you take care of your fingers too. So I would suggest that if you're pruning with hand pruners, any type of pruning, even a saw, wear gloves. The other thing you want to be careful of is, what are you pruning? You know, are you pruning plants that you're creating points? Blueberries, I'm creating a point by cutting the branch back. I have points now. So I'm cutting these and I'm moving further into the plant. So the other thing I have to be careful of are my eyes and my ears. And you should be likewise. A lot of people, now they would use glasses like these if they're doing a lot of pruning. These are good, however. You can sweat with them on. You want to take them off and have a paper towel with you to dry them up once in a while if you use these and they sweat on you. The other thing you can use is on your eyes. If you tend to have glasses, now wear your glasses. You can wear your glasses, you're protecting your eyes. On the ears, it's important. I know that in the nursery business, if you have a crew out pruning, say, crabapple trees, you generally give them all earplugs so they can put them in the ears. Because, again, you're pruning branches and you're creating, branches with points on them. So you want to be careful with your hands, your eyes, and your ears. And once you do that, you're pretty good. Cold weather like we have right now, I love this here. I tend to get cold around the neck, so I'll put this on. And my ears are covered, my nose, but I don't have trouble with my nose. But you can use something like this in cold weather. This is ideal. Earplugs is the next best thing. And by doing this here, you're protecting yourself and you're doing a good job. I don't know if you have any questions on the safety aspect to it. I do know that maybe 6 or 7 years ago when I was over working in the garden center, one of the associates came in Monday morning, and it was during the summer months, so wearing short sleeves and some of us had shorts on. This person had a Band-Aid this long on the right arm. And I asked him, I said, "What happened to you?" "Oh, I was working at my client's place over the weekend, and the client came out, and I was working while I was talking with him, and before I knew it, I had some blood coming down my arm." So it's important that, if you're using these tools, stop if you have neighbors or somebody that comes over or talks to you. Maybe you have to invite them in for a cup of tea if they're a good neighbor, just to get rid of them. And then, you can go back to your pruning. But it's important that, you watch what you're doing. Many of us, we can do 2 or 3 things at once. Some of us can drive and talk on the cell phone and have the seat belt on good, but you don't want to multitask when you're pruning. Now, it may become boring. You might not have an issue with pruning. You might never hurt yourself. But usually, when people get hurt, it's usually the unexpected things that happen. Other than that, I'm pretty well done with the tools and protection. This handout that you have, I don't want to spend too much time on it, but on the last page, if we start at the bottom of the tree, this is like a picture of an apple or a crabapple tree. And you got like little shoots coming out of the ground here. I usually call these suckers. And I don't know if you know it, but in the nursery business, it takes a lot of years to get a baby plant from a seed or a cutting up to market size. So if you have crab apples and you sell a lot of crab apples at your nursery center and you actually have fields where you grow them, you might want to also have a crop of small crab apples available. If you're running low on a particular crab apple, like a hopper, H-O-P-P-A is one large crab apple. What the nursery will do is they'll take these little crab apple trees that are 2 or 3 years old in a pot. They'll bring them inside during the winter because this is a winter chore. It's called grafting. And they'll go to this hopper tree out in the field, or if it's a showpiece in the front of the garden center or nursery. You'll cut off some of the branches that you need, because looking at your inventory, you see, I won't have hopper crab apples for 4 or 5 years if I don't start grafting some. So what the person will do is bring these branches in from the large plant that they have on site. They'll bring out their supply of small crab apples about 3 years old, and they'll graft these branches onto the little crab apples that are 3 years old in a pot. And this is why you sometimes see at the bottom of a tree you may buy, or if you happen to be in a garden center and you look at the bottoms of some of these trunks, you'll see like a joint or a bunion very large. This is where the branch of the hopper was grafted onto the trunk of another crab apple that was 3 years old. And the graft is not matching 100%, but since it's in the same tree family, you can do this. You can take apple trees and graft those also onto crab apples because they're in the same family. They're still mollusks or apple. So these suckers will sprout up because where the graft is, the grafted branch isn't allowing all the food to come up because it's a different type of a growth. And because of that, the root system says, hey, I have a lot of strength in my roots. I'm going to still grow. If you're not going to accept all my food, I'm going to start sending up some suckers. So you'll now see some suckers starting to grow. If you don't take care of those suckers, they'll eventually compete with your main tree. And you could have a very small crab apple on the root system that was used, and you have a very large crab apple on the top here from the hopper. So those suckers you want to either cut off. The best thing, if you can do it, if you catch those suckers when they're young, go out and physically tear them off. Because tearing them, you're getting rid of that joint on the root system where they're coming from. And that discourages them a little more. The other thing is you could go out with a little hatchet and take them off at the top of the roots. The next thing I would be concerned with is, you see these branches going up straight? These branches going up straight are generally called water sprouts. And these water sprouts are happening because you've been pruning over the years. So you're taking off areas where the sap can go, all branches have a lot of bumps on them. All these bumps are what we call nodes. A lot of them are potential new branches. Most of them would be like potential leaves too. So the plant hasn't made up its mind what it's going to do with all these nodes yet. But you, by pruning, are making the plant make a decision. And it could be another branch, could be more flower buds. Pruning encourages flower buds on all plants. So if you want to have a lot of flowers on your crab apples, dogwoods, apple, peaches, plum trees, you want to get out and prune each year. If you don't prune, the branch is going to produce more leaves. It's not being invigorated to produce the flower. The flowers are being produced to produce the seed to survive. So that's why you're out there pruning, is you want to encourage the flowers. So these water sprouts, you ought to cut them right back to the branch. So all the water sprouts, when they're coming up, and you want to be just a little bit careful on the pruning. If you take your pruners and physically push it hard on that branch to cut off that water sprout, you might damage the bark enough where it's going to have a wound that will take 1 year to 2 years to heal good. So you might want to back off just a whisker when you prune off the water sprouts. And that way there you won't damage the main bark on the branch. If you've got multiple tops on the trees, you should have just one main trunk on most trees. However, we know a lot of trees tend to be a bushier looking type. Crab apples, dogwoods, apple trees, they tend to be a bushier type of a tree. An oak tree or a maple tree, they tend to be more upright, more of a singular trunk. But you'll find that by pruning, you're going to force a lot of new growth on what's left on the tree. What you're aiming for is a lot of these smaller branches, which would be the ones that would produce your flowers. And your flowers are what you're looking for 9 times out of 10, because you first have your flower, then the fruit develops. A lot of people enjoy the look of a beautiful flowering crab apple or a dogwood or an apple tree or a peach tree. The flowers are wonderful. So you'd end up taking off one of these 2 at the top where they split. And by doing that, you're making the tree stronger. If your branches are long and leggy, taking off the ends a little bit makes what's left stronger too. Some years, if you get an ice storm versus a snowstorm, and the sap may have started coming up a little bit because of the warm days in the winter and the ground's not completely frozen hard all the way down, it's important that you want to watch your legginess of your branches. If they're too leggy, heavy snow load, some trees are more brittle than areas on a snow load. I noticed that dogwood trees, if you don't prune your dogwood trees, they really get hurt pretty bad on an ice storm. And by keeping an eye on them and pruning the legginess off and watching the tops, you only have one strong center, you should be fine. If branches cross each other, again, a bird flying through the branches, if the branches cross each other and a bird can't get through that spot, you're going to take off the branch that's pushing up against the trunk. So again, you want to have it so a tree can breathe. If a tree can't breathe, it's going to start suffocating a little bit. It's going to cause disease. It's going to cost a home for bugs to settle up in. So it's important that you have good air drainage. The timing on this fruit guide this planting guide is pretty good. I don't want to spend much time on here. Basically, your deciduous plants, you want to take them back this time of the year. You might want to prune your evergreens a little bit in the spring if you have like a hedge or if you have yews around the house with a foundation or along a walkway. Those you would prune, cutting back just a little bit. And I didn't go over this one, but These are Hedge Shears. I like them. They have like a little cushion here, so when you work with them, you don't get a lot of tension on your shoulders. These are just like your pruners. It's a bypass. One's a cutting edge and one's kind of a holding. And you want to keep this clean with a pocket knife. A lot of times your resin builds up on these and they start sticking on you. And this usually happens during the month of June. Usually June into July is when you're out there pruning the evergreens in the yard. So again, you want to keep your eye on the resin buildup. Use a pocket knife to clean it off. Again, the blade that goes down like a hill is the blade that you want to sharpen. You're going to push down on it and kind of push out. And you always want to keep that sharp. This is very sharp, to say the least. So I like the Hedge Shears. They're good for evergreens. You can use these on forsythia now outside. If you've got a forsythia that's going crazy, you can get out there and prune them up. But you know, Hedge Shears, same as pruners, and drop or two of oil here, sharpening, going downhill on the cutting blade. Pocket knife, cleaning off your resin, and you'll have a good tool. You want to have sharp cuts because that'll allow the plant to heal much quickly on the cut area. Other than that, I'd like to get into showing you some of the material I brought in. I don't know if many of you have raspberries. I got to get my gloves on because I feel the raspberry. I should wear my glasses too. I'll be a bad example if I didn't. This is a raspberry. I have two types of raspberries for home use. And one of these is called a fall raspberry. This is the fall one. You can see the stems where the fall raspberry was on. These you can actually prune below where the older growth was with the fruit from last year. These little bumps on the end, they're actually alive. These are live buds, even though it produced here. You cut off basically the dead growth. You could have some raspberries in the latter part of the spring going into the summer on the fall raspberries. But I usually cut these back to the ground and I'll have a new shoot come up. Come this fall, I'll have a crop of raspberries. These are the fall raspberries. I swore when I grew up that, you know, I love raspberries, I would plant summer raspberries, which I did. I enjoy them very much. But when I had the flavor in the fall raspberry in the fall, I said it's time to plant some fall ones too, because I love the flavor of the raspberries. So generally I would go out, and again, that's up to you. If you have some fall ones, you know, you can just take the end here and, you know, just cut it back and you're done. Myself, I don't want to pick these, you know, beginning of the summer or the end of the spring, so I'll cut these back to the ground. So I'll cut it off. The root system that's left in the ground will send up a new shoot. So I'm not worried about this because I'm not disturbing the root system at all. It's just the way the raspberries grow. The other type of raspberries that I have are the summer ones. And those are a little bit different. This is my older cane from the summer raspberry. And this I have to take out completely. So I would go through and cut these guys out. And then this is my new shoot. If I didn't prune it, it would be all over the place in the garden. And I would lose out on efficiency of picking and fighting to get them.
The birds could still
Huh?
The birds can still eat them.
Oh, yeah. The birds really, I'm surprised. They don't seem to bother the raspberries too much. But I would go in and cut out the older one because it's no good anymore. And on these long ones, I generally cut them up about 3 feet. The other tree I brought in, this is it's a branch of an apple tree, I think. Yeah, you can see here that it's got like 2 branches coming up. And there's a little dead piece here from where it was cut. This was cut here last year. And because of it, you've had 2 branches that have come up. I would, at this point, if it's growing and I want to get fruit off of it, I've got to make a choice. I don't want to have an ice storm come up and do this to me, because then I have a problem with the tree. It won't be as strong. So I would either decide to cut it back somewhat. So I would cut this like here, and this branch, cut it back to here. And this one here, these little branches here with the fat buds on the ends, they're possibility of flowers. But these long leggy ones, that's all leaf growth. So to allow more sun in, now you take these back a little bit, not a whole lot. And by doing that, you're encouraging more sun coming in. On your branching, this branch here is the only one coming out on this side. This raspberry is... So this branch is the only one coming out on this side. I find on apple trees, crabapple trees, dogwood trees, when they're young, the branches tend to want to stay more towards the center of the plant. And by pruning back a little bit, you're going to allow more light in. By pruning off the ends of your longer branches, you're going to create more branches further back, and that's going to make your branches kind of spread out a little more. So by pruning, you're encouraging the whole plant to open up. One year, I noticed, I used to work in the Framingham area. I would go the back roads of Holliston, down through Ashland and up into Framingham. Outpost Turkey Farm in Holliston used to farm the fields on the top of the hill there before you go down into Ashland. Their 2 sons at the time, I'm dating myself, I'm going back to the 70s. The 2 sons there wanted to do apple trees, so they planted 2 rows of apple trees down on the top of the hill there, going down a little bit. And the first time I noticed it, there was a bunch of bottles like this hanging on the branches, and they had water or fluid in them. So every morning I would go by, I'd see all these bottles on the tree, and I'm saying, why do they have these bottles on the tree with a little bit of water? And come to find out, come the fall, all of a sudden all the bottles disappeared. The branching had come down because of the sap coming up during the growing season. The branches became rigid. So these branches being held way down by the bottles with a little bit of fluid in it, it opened up the apple trees so they got more light into them and they could grow better and faster. So I know that now this is one way of bringing the branches down on a young tree. It might not be to your liking if you're in a neighborhood where people talk about each other a little bit. But that's the reason for now using a bottle to that effect. And you can determine how far down, once you tie it on, you can add fluid and determine how far down you want that branch to come. You could make it come down espalier, as they call it, growing it on a wire. You can pull it down that far. So that's one way of spreading the branches. But this is what I would do on this here. I've taken back some of the tall ones. I've pruned back some of the leggy ones. And I'd be pretty well set. I would cut off this bottom branch here because I want to have good air drainage around the bottom. But this is what I would do on a young fruit tree. And the last one here, actually, if you have evergreens, you can take evergreens, you can take any plant back pretty hard. If you cut back here, you're risking the chance that this might die all the way back because of other branches having some foliage on it. So in pruning, your evergreens, if you don't want to lose any of the branches, but you want to cut it back hard, leave a branch on with some foliage. Like this here, I took this off, but I left this branch on, and hopefully this will thicken up, and this will give us a little more screening. And this one here, I can take this off also. So I've taken this back about a foot. I've made this more bushy looking, and then you've got these smaller branches that are going to fill it in. This is a blueberry one right here. This is an oldie. It's good. I planted this in 1969, this plant here. Still growing. If you look on here, you got the ends of cuts over the years. You can kind of tell how old it is. This is one bump here. This is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. This is 7 years of pruning on this here to get it where it is. You can see this here, if you look closely, there's not too many buds on here. There's like one here, one here. There's 3 flower buds, maybe 4 on this branch here. This branch here, there's hardly anything. So I would be tempted to cut this back very hard. This small branch here, there's not too much on it. So I've got a choice. This is a new branch. Every one of these has a flower bud on it. So you're going to have blueberries here. These are long shoots. I would generally leave a couple of nodes or bumps on it to make new branches. And by pruning this here back, you're going to force more growth into your blueberries and into your leaves and new branching. This one here, I would be tempted to cut the whole thing back because when they're produced and they're kind of dead looking, usually that will die completely and you're all done with it. So I would generally just take these off completely. Either that or I could cut it back here. I might possibly have some growth coming out here. I kind of doubt it, having raised them for many years. But this is what you would end up with. The other thing is you would, if you are doing it right, you should have some new shoots coming up from prior years. And generally, the first year you would cut it in half, and then the following year you might have 2 shoots or a real long one at a dead spot. But you want to have a new shoot coming up each year if it's possible on an older blueberry bush.
Wow, that was a lot of great information from Henry. And we're so happy that Weston Nursery has us here for their seminars. Watch for upcoming ones that we're going to show on HCAT TV. This is Deb Moore for How Does Your Garden Grow?